The spit hit her apron before anyone could blink, deliberate, venomous, meant to humiliate. Melrose Diner in downtown Chicago had seen drama before. Drunken fights, breakups over cold pancakes, cops dragging out troublemakers at 2 a.m, but nothing could have prepared the 47 people inside for what unfolded in booth 12 that night. The bell jingled around 8:30. Most folks didn't look up, but when Wei Jiang walked in, the air shifted. He wore a navy suit that probably cost more than most people made in 6 months. Diamond cufflinks caught the fluorescent lights. Italian leather shoes clicked against faded linoleum with the confidence of a man who had never questioned whether he belonged anywhere. Wei Jiang, billionaire. Forbes cover regular, CEO of Jiang Global Holdings, an empire stretching from New York penthouses to factories overseas. But in this greasy spoon diner where the coffee was always weak and the bacon always crispy, none of that mattered yet. Danielle Carter moved toward his booth with practiced grace. White blouse, black slacks, standard issue apron with a grease stain that refused to come out. Her sneakers squeaked against the floor. Dark circles lived under her eyes from too many double shifts, but beneath the exhaustion burned something fiercer. A quiet strength that came from getting knocked down and choosing to stand back up. "Evening," she said, pulling out her notepad. "What can I get you?" Wei didn't look up from his phone. His hand waved dismissively. "Black coffee, eggs, sunny side up, no salt. Make sure it's hot. I don't have time for incompetence." Danielle's pen paused. She'd dealt with rude customers before, but something about his casual cruelty made her jaw tighten. Still, she wrote it down. "Coming right up." "Wait." She glanced back. Wei finally looked up. His eyes swept over her like she was furniture he was considering buying. "What's your name?" Her name tag was visible anyway. "Danielle." Something flickered across his face. Confusion? Recognition? Gone in a second, replaced by cold superiority. "Danielle," he repeated slowly. "Interesting." She turned and walked away, feeling his stare burning into her back. The order came fast. Steaming coffee, perfect eggs. She set the plate down gently. "Here you go. Anything else?" "This is cold." Steam rose from the eggs. The coffee was scalding hot. "I'm sorry, sir, but..." "Don't argue with me. I said it's cold. Are you calling me a liar?" The diner's noise, Motown from the jukebox clattering silverware laughter, faded into background static. "No, sir. I can bring you a fresh plate." "You think that fixes it?" Wei leaned back, arms crossed. "You think an apology makes up for wasting my time?" Danielle's hands trembled. She clenched them into fists. "Breathe. 2 more hours. Marcus needs this job. I apologize for any inconvenience. Let me..." "You people," Wei interrupted, lip curling. "You think because you serve food, you're entitled to stand this close to me, to breathe the same air?" An elderly couple stopped eating. A mother shushed her toddler. The line cook peeked from the kitchen. Wei stood slowly, deliberately, over 6 feet tall, using every inch to tower over her, his face twisted with pure contempt. "People like you," he said, venom dripping from every word. "You're nothing. You'll always be nothing." Then he spat, directly onto her apron. The diner erupted. Gasps from every corner. Forks clattered. A water glass shattered. A teenage girl pulled out her phone, already filming. Danielle froze. Shock and rage crashed over her in waves. Her brain screamed to move, to throw the coffee in his face, but she couldn't. Then something impossible happened. Wei's smirk vanished. His eyes widened, pupils dilating. His breathing quickened. His hands shook uncontrollably. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." His knees buckled. The billionaire collapsed onto the greasy floor. Hard, his expensive suit crumpled. And then he started crying, full body shaking sobs that tore from his throat. He clutched his head, rocking back and forth like a child in a nightmare. Complete silence. 47 people stared, unable to process what they were seeing. Danielle looked down at the broken man on his knees, the man who had called her nothing, the man who had spat on her, now sobbing so hard he could barely breathe. Her heart pounded, confusion mixed with anger, mixed with something else she couldn't name. Because he wasn't crying from guilt. He was crying because he recognized her name. And whatever that recognition meant was about to change everything. Danielle Carter wasn't supposed to be at Melrose Diner that night. She was supposed to be in a lecture hall at the University of Illinois, notebook open, chasing the story that would launch her journalism career. She was supposed to be interviewing sources, fact-checking articles, debating ethics with classmates over cheap beer and cheaper pizza. But life doesn't care what you're supposed to be doing. Her mother, Linda Carter, had been a nurse, the kind who worked double shifts at Cook County Hospital, who came home with aching feet and stories about saving lives. The kind who believed if you worked hard enough, played by the rules, did everything right, the system would take care of you. She died believing that lie. The cancer came fast. Stage 4 by the time they caught it. Insurance covered some treatments but not others. The bills piled up like snow in a Chicago winter, relentless, suffocating, impossible to dig out from under. Linda fought for 18 months, her body withering while the debt grew fatter. Danielle had been in her junior year when her mother passed, 21 years old, holding her mom's hand in a hospital room that smelled like disinfectant and broken promises. The funeral cost $8,000 they didn't have. The remaining medical bills totaled $63,000. And then there was Marcus, her baby brother. 16, skinny, with their mother's eyes and their father's disappearing act. He needed food, school supplies, a roof over his head, someone to sign permission slips and make sure he didn't fall through the cracks the way so many black kids in their neighborhood did. So Danielle made a choice. She withdrew from school 3 months before graduation, traded her textbooks for order pads, swapped dreams of breaking stories for breaking her back carrying trays. Chicago was brutal that winter, the kind of cold that cut through your coat and settled in your bones. Wind whipped off Lake Michigan like it had a personal vendetta. But every morning Danielle laced up her cheap sneakers and walked 40 minutes to Melrose Diner because the bus fare added up and every dollar mattered. Inside, the diner became her second home. Ruby, the head waitress, a 60-year-old woman with silver hair and a laugh that could fill the whole room, taught her the rhythm. How to balance 4 plates on one arm, which regulars tipped well and which ones you served with a smile but no expectations. How to stand for 10 hours straight without your feet going completely numb. The jukebox in the corner played the same Motown hits on repeat. Marvin Gaye, The Temptations, Aretha demanding respect that nobody in power seemed willing to give. The vinyl booths were cracked, held together with duct tape. The coffee was always too weak, the bacon always too crispy. But the people, truckers, lawyers, students, insomniacs, they became familiar faces in a city that could make you feel invisible. Danielle smiled at customers, laughed at bad jokes, refilled coffee cups and cleared plates and pretended the weight crushing her chest didn't exist. But late at night, after Marcus fell asleep and the apartment went quiet, she'd pull out her old notebooks. Articles she'd written for the university paper. Investigative pieces about housing discrimination, police brutality, healthcare inequality. Stories that mattered. Stories that could have made a difference. She'd run her fingers over the words and feel something dark and bitter coil in her stomach. Not quite regret. She'd make the same choice for Marcus 1,000 times over. But grief. For the version of herself she'd had to bury. For the career that died with her mother. For the dreams deferred so long they started to feel like someone else's memories. Some nights the bitterness tasted like rage. At a system that let insurance companies decide who lived and who died. At hospitals that sent collection agencies after grieving families. At a country that preached equality while building walls between people like Wei Zhang and people like her mother. Danielle wanted justice. Not the abstract kind they talked about in textbooks. Real justice. The kind that held powerful people accountable. The kind that said your life matters even if you're not rich, not connected, not deemed worthy by people who've never missed a meal or worried about keeping the lights on. She wanted someone, anyone, from that world of penthouses and private jets to look her in the eye and acknowledge what their comfort cost people like her family. She never imagined that moment would come in the form of a billionaire's spit on her apron, or that his breakdown would be the beginning of something bigger than she could possibly understand. Because Danielle Carter carried more than plates and coffee pots. She carried her mother's memory, her brother's future, and a hunger for truth that 3 years of serving scrambled eggs hadn't managed to kill. And maybe, deep in some part of her soul she didn't like to examine too closely, she'd been waiting for this moment, waiting for her shot, waiting for the universe to put someone in front of her who deserved what was coming. That night at Melrose Diner, the universe delivered. Wei Jiang learned early that the world was divided into 2 types of people, those who take and those who get taken from. He grew up in San Francisco's Chinatown, in a cramped apartment above his parents' grocery store, 300 square feet for 4 people. His mother worked the register 16 hours a day. His father hauled produce before dawn, his back permanently bent from decades of lifting crates. Wei's older sister slept on the couch. He slept on the floor. They weren't poor by the standards of where they'd come from, a village outside Guangzhou where his grandmother still lived without running water. But in America, surrounded by cable cars and tech millionaires and tourists spending more on sourdough bread than Wei's family spent on groceries for a week, poverty felt different, sharper, more personal. His parents spoke broken English. Customers mocked their accents. Kids at school called him names he learned to ignore because fighting back only made it worse. Teachers looked at him and saw a stereotype, good at math, quiet, forgettable. But Wei wasn't forgettable. He was calculating. He realized something at 12 years old, watching his father count pennies at the kitchen table. Dignity was a luxury his family couldn't afford. His parents bowed to rude customers, apologized for things that weren't their fault, smiled through humiliation because they needed every sale, every dollar, every scrap of tolerance from people who looked down on them. Wei decided he would never bow to anyone. He studied like his life depended on it, because it did. Perfect grades, perfect test scores, scholarships to prep school, then Yale, economics degree with honors. He absorbed everything, how money moved, how power worked, how the people at the top of the ladder pulled it up behind them to keep everyone else down. And he climbed anyway. By 25, he'd made his first million in real estate, buying properties in Oakland before the tech boom, flipping them for triple the price. By 30, he'd expanded into imports, leveraging connections in China his competitors couldn't access. By 35, Zhang Global Holdings was worth $2 billion. Skyscrapers in New York, hotels in Miami, tech startups in Los Angeles, factories overseas where labor was cheap and regulations were suggestions. Wei built an empire on the same principle that had governed his childhood. Take before you get taken from. The media loved him. Self-made billionaire. Immigrant success story. Living proof the American dream wasn't dead. He gave speeches at Yale, donated to charities, smiled for magazine covers, Forbes, Fortune, Time. But behind closed doors, Wei was ruthless. He crushed competitors, fired employees without severance, squeezed suppliers until they had no choice but to accept his terms. Anyone who threatened his empire got destroyed, legally when possible, extra-legally when necessary. He told himself it was survival. The world was a jungle, and apex predators didn't apologize for eating. His parents had been prey their entire lives. Wei refused to be prey ever again. Still, success came with ghosts. Late nights in his Manhattan penthouse, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city he'd conquered, Wei couldn't sleep. He'd pour whiskey he didn't taste and stare at his reflection in the glass. Sometimes he looked like his father, same cheekbones, same intensity. Other times he looked like a stranger. The nightmares started 5 years ago. Always the same. A woman's face. Papers scattered across a desk. The sound of someone crying in an office he tried not to remember. He'd wake up sweating, heart racing, the taste of guilt bitter on his tongue. But guilt was weakness. Weakness got you destroyed. So Wei buried it deeper, built the walls higher, made sure nobody, not his business partners, not his advisors, not even himself most days, could see the cracks. Until Melrose Diner. Until a waitress named Danielle set down his eggs and he saw her name tag. Carter. The name hit him like a freight train. Memories he'd locked away came flooding back. An assistant in his New York office. Linda Carter. Efficient, kind, the type who brought homemade cookies to share with the staff. She'd stumbled onto something she shouldn't have seen. Financial documents. Proof of fraud that could have toppled his empire before it fully formed. Wei had made a choice. Her or him. Survival or destruction. He'd had her fired, blacklisted across the industry, made sure she'd never work in corporate America again. When she'd actually begged for her health insurance to continue because she'd just been diagnosed, he'd looked her in the eye and said no. That was 10 years ago. He'd convinced himself it was necessary. Just business. The cost of building something great. But seeing that name tag, Danielle Carter, shattered every wall he'd built. Because if this was Linda's daughter, then Linda was probably dead. Dead from the cancer that his cruelty had made untreatable. And the weight of that realization, the full horror of what his ruthlessness had cost, crushed him. In that diner, surrounded by ordinary people living ordinary lives he'd long ago stopped seeing as fully human, Wei Zhang finally understood something terrifying. You can't outrun your sins forever. Eventually they find you. Usually when you least expect it. And sometimes they're wearing a waitress uniform and carrying the truth you've been running from for a decade. The thing about public breakdowns is that they happen in slow motion for the person experiencing them, but at lightning speed for everyone watching. For Wei Zhang, the moment lasted an eternity. He'd been standing over Danielle, drunk on his own superiority. The spit still glistened on her apron. Her face, frozen between shock and rage, mirrored every person he'd ever crushed under his expensive shoes. And for a second, just one perfect second, he'd felt powerful, untouchable. Like the scared kid from Chinatown had fully died and been replaced by this man who could humiliate someone and face zero consequences. Then his eyes dropped to her name tag. Carter. The letters seemed to glow. His vision tunneled. Sound muffled like someone had stuffed cotton in his ears. His heart hammered so hard he thought it might crack his ribs. Danielle Carter. Linda's daughter. Had to be. Same last name. Same city. Too specific to be coincidence. The universe didn't work that way. And if this was Linda's daughter, then Linda. His legs stopped working, just completely gave out. 1 second he was standing, the next his knees hit the diner floor hard enough to bruise. Pain shot up his thighs, but he barely felt it. Couldn't feel anything except the crushing weight of 10 years of denial slamming into him all at once. For everyone else, it happened in 3 seconds. The billionaire spat on the waitress, then he collapsed. Then he started sobbing like someone had reached into his chest and torn his heart out. Ruby, the head waitress, froze mid-pour. Coffee spilled over the side of the mug, pooling on the counter. A trucker 2 booths over dropped his burger. The teenager filming shook so hard her phone nearly slipped from her hands, but she kept recording. Some instinct told her this moment would matter. That whatever was happening was bigger than a rude customer having a mental breakdown. She was right. Wei clutched his head with both hands, fingers tangling in his perfectly styled hair. His $2,000 suit crumpled against the grimy floor. His Italian leather shoes, the ones he'd had custom made in Milan, skidded slightly on a patch of grease near the booth. No, he whispered. Then louder, no, 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 no. The sobs came in waves. Ugly, chest heaving, snot running down his face, crying. The kind that strips away every pretense of dignity. The kind you do when you realize you can't take something back, can't undo it, can't throw money at it until it goes away. Danielle stood frozen above him. Her hands trembled at her sides. Part of her wanted to kick him while he was down, to spit on him the way he'd spat on her, to scream every cruel thing he'd said back in his face. But she couldn't move, couldn't speak, because his reaction made no sense. This wasn't embarrassment. This wasn't a rich man realizing he'd been caught on camera doing something monstrous. This was genuine horror, like he'd seen a ghost. "Sir?" The word came out small, uncertain. "Sir, are you—" "I killed her," Wei gasped between sobs. "Oh God, I killed her, I killed her." The diner went silent. Even the jukebox seemed to stop, though that was probably just perception. 47 witnesses held their collective breath. Danielle's blood turned to ice. "What did you say?" But Wei wasn't talking to her anymore. He was somewhere else, lost in whatever nightmare had hijacked his brain. His whole body shook. Tears streamed down his face, mixing with the snot dripping onto his ruined suit. An elderly man, Jerry, a regular who came in every Tuesday for meatloaf, stood up slowly. "Should someone call 911? "I'll handle it," Ruby said, but she didn't move. Nobody moved. They were all transfixed, watching the impossible. A man who could buy and sell the entire diner, having a complete psychological collapse in the middle of the dinner rush. Danielle's shock began transforming into something else, something dangerous, because his words, "I killed her," sparked a memory. Her mother, near the end, delirious from pain meds, rambling about her old job, about a boss who'd destroyed her, about injustice that ate at her even as cancer ate her body. "Look at me," Danielle said, her voice harder now. "Look at me." Wei's sobs hitched. Slowly, like it took every ounce of strength he had left, he lifted his head. His eyes, red, swollen, haunted, met hers. And in that moment, they both understood. He knew exactly who she was, and she was beginning to understand what he'd done. "Linda Carter," Wei whispered, her mother's name falling from his lips like a confession. "You're Linda's daughter." The diner seemed to tilt. Danielle grabbed the edge of the booth to steady herself. "How do you know my mother's name?" Wei's voice cracked. He tried to stand but couldn't. His expensive suit was covered in grease and dirt and the remnants of his breakdown. "I worked with her. Years ago. Before what?" The teenager's phone captured everything. The way Wei's face crumpled again. The way Danielle's expression shifted from confusion to dawning horror. The way the entire diner became a stage for something none of them fully understood yet, but everyone felt in their bones was important. "Before I destroyed her," Wei finished. Those 4 words hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Danielle's knees went weak. She sank into the booth across from where Wei knelt on the floor. Her mind raced, trying to piece together fragments. Her mother had worked in corporate offices before Danielle was born. She'd been fired from somewhere. The timing aligned with when the medical bills started, when their lives began the slow spiral into poverty and debt and— "You," Danielle breathed. "You're the reason she lost her insurance." Wei didn't deny it. He just kept crying, kept kneeling on that filthy floor like a sinner begging for absolution he knew he didn't deserve. And in that moment, every person in Melrose Diner became a witness to something rare and terrible. A powerful man facing the consequences of his cruelty. Not in a courtroom. Not in some abstract way where lawyers and PR teams could spin the narrative. Right here. Right now. Reduced to nothing by the daughter of the woman he'd destroyed. The teenager's finger hovered over the post button. She pressed it. And the video went live. Danielle didn't sleep that night. She'd walked home in a daze after her shift, Wei's sobs still echoing in her ears. Ruby had called the police, who'd called paramedics, who'd taken the billionaire away in an ambulance, not for physical injuries, but because he'd been incoherent, muttering about death and guilt and sins coming due. The video was already spreading, In the 3 hours between the incident and when Danielle collapsed onto her worn couch, the clip had been viewed 200,000 times. By morning, it would be millions, but she barely registered any of that. Her mind kept circling back to 4 words. Before I destroyed her. Marcus had already gone to bed. The apartment was quiet except for the radiator clanking and the muffled sound of someone's TV through the thin walls. Danielle sat in the dark, still wearing her uniform, the spit stain dried and crusty against the fabric. She should shower, should sleep, should process what had happened in some rational way. Instead, she stood and walked to the closet in the hallway, the one filled with boxes they'd never unpacked after moving here 3 years ago. Her mother's belongings, sealed away because looking at them hurt too much. Danielle pulled down the largest box. Dust coated the cardboard. She carried it to the small kitchen table, turned on the overhead light, and just stared at it for 5 full minutes. What are you hoping to find? She asked herself. Proof? Answers? Or just more pain? She opened the box. The smell hit her first, her mother's perfume, faint but unmistakable. Tears stung Danielle's eyes. She blinked them back, forced herself to focus. Inside, photographs. Her parents' wedding, back when her father still smiled. Baby pictures of Danielle and Marcus. Her mother in scrubs, exhausted but proud after a double shift. Underneath the photos, papers. So many papers. Hospital bills. Danielle had seen these before, had been drowning in them. But she kept digging. Deeper. Past the medical debt. Past funeral expenses. Until her fingers brushed something different. An employment contract. Her hands trembled as she pulled it out. The paper was thick, official. Corporate letterhead at the top. Zhang Global Holdings. Danielle's heart stopped. No, she whispered. No, that's not. But it was. Right there in black ink. Linda Marie Carter, Executive Assistant. Hire date, March 2012. The contract detailed salary, benefits, health insurance, all the things her mother had lost. There was more. Danielle dug frantically now, papers scattering across the table. Another document. A termination notice. Employment ended effective immediately. Cause, breach of confidentiality. No severance. No insurance continuation. Nothing. The date, August 2014. Danielle's breath came in short gasps. That was the year everything fell apart. The year her mother started getting sick. The year the bills started piling up faster than they could manage. The year their lives began the descent that ended with her mother dying in a hospital bed, drowning in debt. He did this, Danielle said to the empty apartment. Wei Zhang did this to her. She kept searching, desperate now for anything that would make sense of this nightmare. More papers, more documents, and then, tucked in an envelope at the very bottom, letters. Her mother's handwriting, shaky, uncertain, written in the weeks after she'd been fired. Dear Mr. Zhang, I'm writing to request reconsideration of my termination. I understand there was a misunderstanding regarding the financial documents I accessed. I was only trying to reconcile accounts as part of my duties. I never intended to. The letter broke off mid-sentence. Unsent. Another one, dated a week later. Mr. Zhang, please. I just received my diagnosis. Stage 2 breast cancer. Without insurance, I can't afford treatment. I'm begging you to reconsider the benefits termination. I have 2 children. I will sign any NDA. Agree to any terms. Please. Also unsent. A third letter, dated 2 months later. The handwriting worse, more desperate. You did this on purpose. You knew what would happen without insurance. You looked me in the eye when I begged and you said no. I hope you remember my face when... This one was torn in half. Linda had ripped it up before finishing. Danielle pressed both hands against her mouth to keep from screaming. Rage and grief crashed through her in waves. Her mother had known, had understood exactly what Wei Zhang had done. Had tried to fight back and failed because how do you fight a billionaire when you're already drowning? The last item in the box was a small notebook, her mother's journal from that year. Danielle's hands shook as she opened it. August 15th, 2014. I found something I wasn't supposed to see. Fraud. Millions moving through offshore accounts. I only looked because the numbers weren't adding up in the quarterly reports. I went to HR. I followed protocol. And now I'm being punished for doing the right thing. August 30th, 2014, fired today. John called me into his office personally. I've never seen eyes that cold. Like I wasn't even human to him. Just a problem to eliminate. September 10th, 2014. Diagnosis confirmed. Without insurance, treatment will cost everything we have and more. I don't know what to do. I can't leave Danielle and Marcus alone. I can't. The entries grew shorter, more desperate, more resigned. November 2014. Started treatment. Already behind on rent. Danielle doesn't know how bad it is. March 2015, cancer spread. Oncologist says we should have started treatment sooner, but we couldn't afford it sooner, because of him. July 2016. I'm not going to win this fight. I need to make sure my kids survive what's coming. The final entry was dated 1 week before she died. If you're reading this, Danielle, and I hope you never do, know that what happened wasn't your fault. Wasn't bad luck. There are people in this world who destroy lives and never face consequences. I wanted to be strong enough to fight back. I wasn't. Maybe you will be. Danielle closed the journal. Tears streamed down her face, hot and bitter. Her mother had known, had understood that Wei Zhang's cruelty had killed her as surely as the cancer, and she died believing there was no justice, no accountability, no way to make him pay. But he'd recognized Danielle's name, had broken down in that diner, which meant the guilt had been eating at him for years, which meant he knew exactly what he'd done and had chosen to do nothing, until confronted with the consequences face to face. Danielle looked at the scattered papers covering her kitchen table. Evidence. Proof. A paper trail connecting her mother's death to Wei Zhang's deliberate cruelty. Her phone buzzed, messages flooding in. The video had gone viral. News outlets were reaching out. People wanted her story. But Danielle wasn't thinking about fame or media attention. She was thinking about her mother's last words. Maybe you will be. Maybe she would be strong enough. Strong enough to fight back. Strong enough to make him pay. She gathered the documents carefully, placed them back in the box. Tomorrow she would figure out what to do with them. Tonight, she would mourn the mother who'd tried to protect her from this truth. And she would let the rage crystallize into something harder, sharper, more dangerous. Wei Zhang had destroyed her family and walked away untouched for 10 years. That was about to change. By sunrise, the world knew Wei Zhang's name for all the wrong reasons. The video had exploded overnight. 5 million views by 6 a.m., 10 million by noon. Cable news picked it up. Social media erupted. Reddit threads dissected every frame. Twitter, now X, turned it into the day's main character moment. Billionaire spits on black waitress, then collapses crying. The headlines wrote themselves, and they got worse for Wei with every refresh. Danielle woke to her phone vibrating nonstop. Texts from people she hadn't spoken to in years. Friend requests from strangers. DMs from journalists offering money for exclusive interviews. Her inbox overflowed with messages that ranged from supportive to parasitic. Ruby called at 7. Don't come in today. Place is surrounded by reporters. They're offering customers money to talk. It's a circus. Marcus stood in the kitchen doorway, eyes wide. You're famous. Like, actually famous. It's all over TikTok. Danielle felt nauseous. She hadn't wanted this, hadn't asked to become a symbol. She just wanted answers about her mother. Justice, maybe. Not performance. But the internet didn't care what she wanted. Activist groups claimed her as a hero. Justice for Danielle trended worldwide. Think pieces appeared within hours. The racism rich men get away with. When billionaires show their true face. Why this waitress's story matters. Someone dug up Wei's history. Old complaints from former employees. rumors of cutthroat business practices, that whistleblower lawsuit from 2018 that mysteriously settled before trial. Suddenly, everyone had a Wei Jiang story, and none of them were flattering. In New York, protesters gathered outside Jiang Global Holdings headquarters, hundreds of people holding signs, "Eat the rich." Billionaires are policy failures. Wei Jiang, racist proud? His corporate offices went into lockdown. Security barred the doors. Employees were told to work from home until further notice. The company's stock price dropped 4% in pre-market trading. Wei's board of directors held an emergency meeting. Investors demanded answers. Partners threatened to pull out of deals. The carefully constructed empire he'd built over 2 decades began showing cracks. His phone rang constantly. Advisors, lawyers, PR firms, all asking the same question. What the hell happened in that diner? Wei couldn't answer. He'd spent the night in a private hospital room, sedated, while doctors ran tests to determine if he'd had a psychotic break. They found nothing physically wrong. No tumor, no stroke. Just a man who'd finally looked in the mirror and couldn't stand what he saw. Late-night hosts opened their monologues with the story. Comedians mimicked his breakdown. Memes spread faster than facts. Someone auto-tuned his sobs into a song. The cruelty of the internet turned his worst moment into entertainment. But beneath the jokes, something darker brewed. People wanted blood, wanted accountability, wanted to see a billionaire face real consequences for once instead of writing a check and moving on. Danielle watched it all unfold from her apartment, feeling like she was drowning. This wasn't what she'd imagined. She'd thought maybe she'd confront Wei privately, demand answers about her mother, force him to acknowledge what he'd done. Instead, the whole world was watching, and they wanted her to perform, to give speeches, to be their champion against wealth inequality and systemic racism and every injustice they'd ever experienced. A producer from a major news network called, "We want you on tonight, prime time, exclusive, name your price." Danielle hung up without answering. A lawyer reached out. "Class action lawsuit. Other former Jiang Global employees coming forward. You could be lead plaintiff. Millions in damages." She didn't respond. Because none of this brought her mother back. None of this filled the hole in their family or erased the years of struggle. The world's attention felt hollow, performative. They'd move on to the next viral moment within a week, and she'd still be here, carrying the same grief. But then Marcus showed her something on his laptop. A forum where former Jiang Global employees were sharing stories. Dozens of them. People who'd been fired without cause. Benefits cut. Wages stolen. Lives destroyed by Wei's ruthless climb to the top. "He's done this to so many people," Marcus said quietly. "Not just Mom. He's been doing it for years." Danielle read through the testimonies. Single mothers losing health insurance right before giving birth. Immigrants threatened with deportation if they complained about conditions. Whistleblowers blacklisted from entire industries. A pattern emerged. Wei Jiang's empire wasn't built on innovation or hard work. It was built on exploitation, cruelty, and the calculated destruction of anyone who got in his way. And he'd gotten away with it because power protects power. Because billionaires have lawyers and PR teams and politicians in their pockets. Because the system was designed to let people like him win. Until now. Until a moment of karmic justice caught on camera forced the world to pay attention. Danielle looked at the box of her mother's documents still sitting on the kitchen table. Evidence of fraud, proof of deliberate harm, the truth Linda Carter had died trying to expose. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. But this one was different. "Ms. Carter, my name is Rachel Kim. I'm an investigative journalist with ProPublica. I've been tracking Jiang Global's financial irregularities for 2 years. I believe your mother discovered the same fraud I'm investigating. We should talk. Not for a story. For justice." Danielle stared at the message for a long time. Maybe the attention wasn't useless. Maybe the world watching meant Wei couldn't make this disappear. Couldn't silence her the way he'd silenced her mother. Maybe, for once, the powerful would actually face consequences. She texted back, when and where. Outside, the city hummed with a story that was bigger than one diner, one billionaire, one waitress. People sensed it, felt it in their bones. Something was shifting, some invisible line was being crossed, and Wei Zhang, locked in his hospital room, felt it too. The empire he'd built on broken backs and buried secrets was finally crumbling, and the daughter of the woman he'd destroyed was holding the match. Manhattan looked different from the 93rd floor. Danielle had taken the train from Chicago to New York, her mother's documents in a backpack that felt heavier than it should. Rachel Kim, the ProPublica journalist, had arranged the meeting. Not with her, with Wei Zhang himself. "He wants to talk to you," Rachel had said on the phone. "Off the record. His lawyers are panicking. They think if he can convince you not to press charges, they can contain this." "Why would I agree to that?" "Because you want answers, and he's desperate enough to give them." So here she stood, 48 hours after the video went viral, in the headquarters of Zhang Global Holdings. The building was all glass and steel, reaching into the sky like a monument to ego. The lobby had marble floors so polished you could see your reflection. Security guards in expensive suits. Art on the walls worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. Everything about this place screamed power, permanence, untouchability. But the protesters outside told a different story. Their chants echoed through the streets. No justice, no peace. Police had formed barricades. News vans lined the block. The whole world was watching. A lawyer escorted Danielle to the elevator, 93 floors up. Her ears popped. The doors opened to reveal an office that looked like something from a movie. Floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the entire city. Modern furniture. A desk bigger than Danielle's kitchen. Success displayed like a weapon. And in the middle of it all, Wei Zhang looked small. He'd aged 10 years in 2 days. His suit was wrinkled. His eyes were bloodshot, ringed with dark circles. His hands trembled as he stood to face her. The arrogant billionaire from the diner had been replaced by something broken. "Thank you for coming," he said, voice hoarse. Danielle didn't sit, didn't speak, just stared at him with an expression that could cut glass. Wei swallowed hard. "I know you have no reason to hear me out." "You're right, I don't." Silence stretched between them. The city sprawled below, oblivious to the confrontation happening above it. "Your mother," Wei started, then stopped. His composure cracked. "Linda, she was a good person." "Don't," Danielle said sharply. "Don't you dare talk about her like you knew her, like you cared." "I did care, that's what made it worse." Wei's voice broke. "She worked for me for 18 months. Best assistant I ever had. Kind, competent. She brought cookies on Fridays, remembered everyone's birthdays. And you destroyed her." "Yes." The admission came out like a confession. She found documents she wasn't supposed to see. Financial records. Proof that I was moving money through offshore accounts to avoid taxes. Inflating property values for loans, then deflating them for tax purposes. Fraud on a massive scale. Danielle's hands clenched into fists. "So you fired her." I panicked. Wei sank into his chair, head in his hands. The business was still growing. One investigation could have toppled everything. So I made a choice. Her or me. You chose yourself. I always choose myself, that's how I survived. He looked up, eyes glistening. But she begged me. Told me she'd just been diagnosed, needed the insurance, had 2 kids. She wasn't threatening to expose me, she just wanted to keep her job. And you said no. Wei's face crumpled. I said no, and I had her blacklisted. Made sure she couldn't work anywhere in the industry. Because I couldn't risk her talking to the wrong person. Couldn't risk my empire crumbling before it was fully built. She died because of you. Danielle's voice was ice. The cancer spread because she couldn't afford treatment. My family went into debt we'll never escape. My brother almost didn't finish high school because I had to drop out to support us. You didn't just fire her, you murdered her. I know. Wei stood abruptly, started pacing. I know. Do you think I don't know? I see her face every night, I hear her voice begging me. I've tried to outrun it with success, with money, with power, but it doesn't work. The guilt is always there. Then why didn't you do anything? Danielle shouted. You're a billionaire. You could have helped us anonymously, paid the medical bills, done something, but you just let us suffer. Because I'm a coward, Wei's voice echoed through the office. Because admitting what I'd done would mean losing everything. And I wasn't strong enough to face that. So I told myself she probably got another job, probably had insurance, probably was fine. I lied to myself for 10 years because the truth was too painful. He collapsed back into his chair and then, like in the diner, his knees gave out. He slid to the floor, this powerful man in his expensive office, and fell apart completely. Please, he sobbed. Please, I'll give you anything. Money, all of it, I'll liquidate everything, just... He crawled toward her on his knees. Actually crawled, tears streaming down his face. Just tell me how to make this right. Tell me how to fix what I broke. Danielle looked down at him. This man who had spat on her, who had killed her mother through deliberate cruelty, who had built an empire on the backs of people he'd destroyed. And she felt nothing. No satisfaction in his breakdown. No joy in his suffering. Just a cold, hollow emptiness where justice was supposed to be. You can't fix it, she said quietly. My mother is dead. Those years are gone. You can't buy them back. Then what do you want? Wei looked up at her, desperate. Please, I'm begging you. What do you want from me? Danielle reached into her backpack and pulled out her mother's documents. She dropped them on the floor in front of him. Papers scattered across the expensive carpet. I want you to confess, publicly, every crime, every person you destroyed, every lie you told. I want the world to know exactly who you are. Wei stared at the documents, his past laid out in black and white, evidence that could send him to prison, destroy his company, erase everything he'd built. If I do that, he whispered, I lose everything. Good. Danielle's voice was steel. You should lose everything, just like we did. She turned toward the door. Wait. Wei scrambled to his feet. If I confess, if I face the consequences, will you forgive me? Danielle paused, looked back over her shoulder, and in that moment, Wei Zhang saw something in her eyes that terrified him more than prison, more than poverty, more than any punishment the law could deliver. He saw his own emptiness reflected back at him. No, Danielle said simply. I'll never forgive you. But maybe, if you're lucky, you'll learn to forgive yourself. She walked out. Left him standing in his glass tower, surrounded by everything he'd ever wanted, finally understanding what it had cost. The elevator descended 93 floors. Danielle watched the numbers drop, feeling the weight of her mother's memory, her brother's future, and a choice she still hadn't fully made. She had the power to destroy Wei Zhang completely. Question was, would destroying him bring her mother back? Would it heal the wound? Or would she become just like him, someone who sacrifices others for personal gain? The elevator doors opened to the lobby. Protesters chanted outside, reporters waited with cameras, and Danielle stepped out into the light, knowing whatever came next would define not just Wei's future but her own. The Manhattan skyline glittered behind her like a promise the city never kept. Danielle stood on the steps of Zhang Global Holdings, clutching the folder of documents to her chest. Below, protesters chanted. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions that blurred together into white noise. Ms. Carter, what did he say to you? Are you pressing charges? Did he offer you money? Rachel Kim appeared at her elbow, creating a buffer between Danielle and the chaos. My car's around the corner. Come on. They pushed through the crowd. Someone grabbed Danielle's sleeve. She jerked away. The world felt too loud, too close, too hungry for a piece of her story. Inside Rachel's car, silence finally. The journalist didn't start the engine immediately, just sat there, giving Danielle space to breathe. He confessed, Danielle said quietly. Everything, the fraud, what he did to my mother, all of it. Rachel's eyes sharpened. Did you record it? No. Damn. Rachel drummed her fingers on the steering wheel. Without proof, his lawyers will bury it. Claim emotional distress, unreliable testimony. You know how this works. Danielle did know. She'd studied journalism long enough to understand that truth without evidence was just noise. Way's word against hers, and the world always believed billionaires over waitresses. But you have those documents, Rachel continued, nodding at the folder. Financial records. Your mother's termination papers. That's concrete. We can build a case that destroys him and everything he's built. And then what? Danielle's voice was hollow. He goes to prison? His company collapses? Thousands of people lose their jobs because their CEO is a monster? Those people work for a fraud. They'll find other jobs. Will they? Danielle turned to face her. In this economy? The admin assistants, the janitors, the cafeteria workers, you think they'll just bounce back? Or will they become collateral damage in our quest for justice? Rachel was quiet for a moment. You're thinking like someone who's lived without a safety net. That's not a bad thing. I'm thinking like someone who knows revenge doesn't pay rent. Danielle leaned her head back against the seat. My brother needs to finish high school, needs college money. I need to figure out how to rebuild a life that's been on pause for 3 years. Way offered you money, didn't he? He offered me everything. Danielle laughed bitterly. Said he'd liquidate his assets, give it all away, as if money could resurrect my mother. But it could change your future. The words hung between them like temptation. Because Rachel was right. Way's money could erase their debt, send Marcus to any university, give Danielle the freedom to finish her degree, chase the career she'd abandoned, buy back the life that had been stolen from them. All she had to do was accept blood money from the man who'd killed her mother. What would you do? Danielle asked. Rachel considered. Honestly, I'd burn him to the ground, but I've never had to choose between justice and survival. That's a luxury most people don't have. Danielle's phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. People from school won't stop asking about the video. When are you coming home? Home. Their tiny apartment with thin walls and a radiator that clanked, where her mother's ghost still lingered in every corner, where dreams went to die slowly, killed by bills and exhaustion, and a system rigged against people like them. She could stay in that apartment forever, righteous and poor, or she could take Way's offer and finally breathe. There's a third option, Rachel said carefully. Make him pay, but not through prison. Use his guilt. Force him to fund scholarships for families affected by corporate fraud. Make him create a foundation in your mother's name. Turn his empire into something that actually helps people. Danielle's heart stuttered. Redemption through action. More like forced restitution. He doesn't get forgiveness, but his money stops being just about him. It becomes a legacy for the people he destroyed. It made sense. Cold, pragmatic sense. Way would keep his freedom but lose his pride. His wealth would serve the communities he'd exploited. And Danielle wouldn't have to carry the weight of thousands of unemployed workers on her conscience. But it also felt like compromise, like letting him off easy. Like her mother's death could be offset by charitable donations. I need to think, Danielle said. Rachel started the engine. Where to? Train station. I need to go home. They drove in silence through Manhattan traffic, past skyscrapers that looked like tombstones, past homeless encampments under overpasses, past the stark divide between Wai's world and the one Danielle inhabited. At Penn Station, Rachel handed her a business card. "Whatever you decide, I'm here. If you want to expose him, I'll help. If you want to negotiate terms, I know lawyers. And if you want to walk away entirely, that's your right too." Danielle took the card. "Thank you. One more thing." Rachel's expression turned serious. "That video has 40 million views now. You've become a symbol whether you wanted to or not. People are watching to see what you do next. Some will support you no matter what. Others will tear you apart for any choice you make. Just be ready for that." Danielle nodded and stepped out into the station. The crowd swallowed her immediately. Commuters rushing home, tourists studying maps, lives intersecting without connection. She bought a ticket to Chicago, found a seat on the train, watched New York disappear as the locomotive pulled away from the platform. The folder sat on her lap, heavy with decisions. Inside, evidence of fraud that could topple an empire. Her mother's desperate letters. Proof of deliberate cruelty that had killed someone who'd done nothing wrong except witness the truth. Danielle opened the folder and read through everything again. Her mother's handwriting, the corporate documents, the timeline of destruction. And she thought about Wai on his knees, crying, broken, begging, finally understanding what his choices had cost. Was that enough? Could it ever be enough? The train rocked gently. Outside, America rolled past, small towns and farmland, and the vast space between extremes. Danielle pulled out her phone, scrolled through messages, activists demanding she destroy Wai, supporters offering prayers, trolls calling her opportunistic, everyone with an opinion about what she should do with a pain they'd never experienced. She opened a new message, stared at the blank screen. Then she started typing. Not to Wai, not to Rachel. To herself. A list of what mattered. Marcus's future mom's memory. Our survival justice versus revenge. What kind of person I want to be. The train crossed into New Jersey, then Pennsylvania. Miles disappearing under steel wheels. By the time Chicago's skyline emerged on the horizon, Danielle had made her decision. She didn't know if it was the right one. Wasn't sure such a thing existed. But it was hers. Chosen not from rage or desperation, but from the hard-earned wisdom of someone who'd survived when the system tried to crush her. She texted Wai's lawyer. "We need to talk. I have terms." Then she texted Marcus. "Coming home, order pizza. We need to discuss your college applications." The train pulled into Union Station. Danielle gathered her things, the folder tucked safely in her backpack. She stepped onto the platform, into the cold Chicago wind, into whatever came next. Behind her, New York and its towers. Ahead, home and all its complications. And somewhere in between, a billionaire waited to learn whether the daughter of the woman he'd destroyed would show him the mercy he'd never shown anyone else. The answer would surprise them both. 3 months later, the announcement broke every major news cycle. Wai Zhang, CEO of Zhang Global Holdings, was stepping down. Not quietly, not into comfortable retirement with golden parachutes and offshore accounts. He was dismantling his empire piece by piece and rebuilding it as something else entirely. The Linda Carter Foundation launched with an endowment of $200 million. Scholarships for families affected by corporate fraud, free legal representation for whistleblowers, medical bill assistance for those denied insurance coverage. Every program designed to help people like Danielle's mother, people the system had chewed up and forgotten. Wai's public confession went viral, not manufactured PR spin, but raw truth. He named the crimes: tax fraud, illegal offshore accounts, deliberate destruction of employees who threatened his wealth. He named the people he'd hurt, read their stories, took accountability without excuses. "I built my success on the suffering of others," he said in the video, his voice steady but his eyes haunted. "Linda Carter is dead because of choices I made. I cannot bring her back, but I can ensure her death means something. That the system that enabled my cruelty gets disrupted, that other families don't endure what the Carters endured. Federal investigators opened cases. Some charges stuck. Wei faced fines, probation, community service. His lawyers negotiated deals that kept him out of prison but stripped away his power. Zhang Global Holdings restructured under new leadership with oversight boards that included former employees and community representatives. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was something. Danielle watched from Chicago, where she'd returned to finish her journalism degree. The university had granted her readmission with a full scholarship, not from Wei, but from people who donated after hearing her story. She was writing again, investigating stories about healthcare inequality and corporate exploitation. Work that mattered. Work her mother would have been proud of. Marcus had gotten into Northwestern on a combination of merit and need-based aid. He wanted to study law. Someone has to make sure people like Wei face consequences, he'd said. Danielle had smiled, seeing her mother's fire burning in her brother's eyes. The diner incident became case study material. Business ethics classes analyzed Wei's breakdown. Psychology courses debated guilt and redemption. Social justice advocates cited it as proof that accountability was possible when people refused to look away. Danielle had declined most interview requests. She'd told her story once, a long-form piece in ProPublica with Rachel Kim that won awards and sparked congressional hearings. Then she'd stepped back. Let the work speak for itself. But today was different. Today, she stood outside the newly opened Linda Carter Community Center in their old neighborhood. The building had been a shuttered factory. Wei's foundation had renovated it into a space offering job training, healthcare navigation, legal aid, all the resources her mother had needed and never found. A plaque near the entrance read, "In memory of Linda Marie Carter, who saw the truth and paid the ultimate price. May we build a world where truth-tellers are protected, not destroyed." Danielle traced the letters with her fingers. Tears blurred her vision, but she didn't wipe them away. She would have loved this, Marcus said beside her, taller now, growing into the man their mother hadn't lived to see. Yeah, Danielle whispered. She would have. A car pulled up. Wei Jiang stepped out. He looked different. Older. Smaller somehow, without the armor of wealth and power. He'd sold the Manhattan penthouse, the private jet, most of the trappings of excess. He lived in a modest apartment now, worked for the foundation he'd created, spent his days trying to repair damage that could never fully be repaired. They hadn't spoken since that day in his office. The negotiations had happened through lawyers. But he'd asked to attend today's opening, and Danielle had agreed. Wei approached slowly, uncertain. He stopped a respectful distance away. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for letting me be here." Danielle studied him, searched for the arrogant billionaire who'd spat on her, found only a broken man trying to carry the weight of his sins with something resembling grace. "This doesn't make us even," she said. "I know. And I still don't forgive you." "I know that too." Wei's voice cracked slightly. "But I'm grateful you gave me the chance to do this. To make her death mean something beyond just waste." Marcus tensed beside Danielle, but she touched his arm gently. Some battles weren't worth fighting anymore. "My mother believed people could change," Danielle said, "even when the world gave her every reason not to. I don't know if you've changed, or if you're just performing penance. But this," she gestured at the community center, "this helps people. And that's what matters." Wei nodded. He looked like he wanted to say more, but some apologies were too small for the crimes they tried to cover. So he just stood there, bearing witness to a legacy that should have been different. The community center's doors opened. People streamed in, families needing help, volunteers ready to serve, lives intersecting in a space built from tragedy and transformation. Danielle watched them, saw herself in their struggles, saw her mother in their determination, saw possibility in what came next. "Are you going to write about this?" Marcus asked. "The whole story?" "Maybe someday," Danielle said. When I have enough distance to be fair, when I can tell it without rage clouding every word. And what will you say? She considered. That justice is complicated. That revenge doesn't heal wounds the way we think it will. That sometimes the hardest choice is between destroying your enemy and building something better from the ashes of what they destroyed. Wei remained silent, but his shoulders shook slightly. Crying again, probably. Or maybe just breathing through the weight of accountability that never got lighter, only more familiar. A little girl ran past them, laughing. Her mother chased her, both of them heading into the center where free healthcare screenings were being offered, where lawyers would help families fight insurance denials, where people wouldn't have to die because someone decided their life wasn't worth saving. Danielle watched them disappear inside and felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness, not closure, but maybe the beginning of peace. Come on, she said to Marcus. Let's go inside. I want to see Mom's memorial. They walked toward the entrance together. Wei stayed behind, understanding he wasn't invited into that moment, that some spaces weren't his to occupy anymore. Inside, the center hummed with life and hope, and the messy work of trying to make broken systems slightly less broken. Danielle stood in front of her mother's photograph, young, healthy, smiling in her nurse's scrubs before cancer and cruelty had stolen her future. We did it, Mom, she whispered. Not the way you would have, not the way anyone expected, but we made something good out of what he took from us. Marcus squeezed her hand. And for the first time in 3 years, Danielle felt her mother's presence not as grief, but as guidance, a reminder that survival was its own form of resistance. That building was harder than destroying, but infinitely more powerful. Outside, Wei Zheng stood alone, watching through the windows as people's lives got slightly easier because of a foundation built on his guilt. He would spend the rest of his life trying to balance scales that would never truly balance. That was his punishment. That was his penance. But inside, Danielle was already moving forward, toward her degree, toward her career, toward a future her mother had paid for with her life, but would never see. The story that began with spit on an apron had transformed into something larger. A case study, a warning, a roadmap for how power could be challenged when ordinary people refused to stay silent. And the waitress who'd been spat on, she became the journalist who told stories that made powerful people uncomfortable, who asked the questions others avoided, who remembered always that every statistic had a name, every tragedy had a family, every system that failed someone did so because someone else had decided their suffering was acceptable. Danielle Carter walked out of the Linda Carter Community Center as the sun set over Chicago, casting long shadows that looked like bridges between what was and what could be. She pulled out her phone and texted Rachel Kim, ready to work on that healthcare fraud investigation. Let's burn down some more empires. The response came immediately. Now we're talking. When do you start? Danielle smiled. Already have. Because the fight wasn't over. Would never be over. But now she had tools her mother never had, power her mother never wielded, and a promise that Linda Carter's death would fuel a lifetime of holding the powerful accountable. Wei Zhang had spat on the wrong waitress, and the world would remember what happened when he did.